I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a double or triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's episode we call DracuLLLa. Emerging from a misty haze of rats and bats in Bram Stoker's Dracula, the notorious antagonist, Count Dracula, has been revived numerous times to grace the silver screen. Fortunately, Castle Grindhouse has the privilege of hosting historian, writer, and cinema veteran Bruce Scivally, who, armed with wolfsbane and garlic flowers, will unveil not just one, but 3 incarnations of the bloodthirsty yet seductive monster. London is plagued by a series of missing children and mysterious illnesses when a Transylvanian count arrives, accompanied by peculiar luggage containing soil and an eccentric real estate agent with a ravenous appetite for insects. Is this all just a coincidence, or does the mysterious Count Dracula conceal a dark, vampiric secret? Dwight Frye, Helen Chandler, and Bela Lugosi star in Todd Browning's Dracula from 1931. In the wake of his partner's untimely demise, Dr. Van Helsing is propelled into action, determined to find the killer and put an end to his reign of terror. But with all the cards stacked against him, including all the townsfolk, how will he stand a chance against the bloodthirsty Count? Peter Cushing, Michael Gough, and Christopher Lee star in the 1958 Terence Fisher film, Horror of Dracula. The tranquil port town of Whitby, England is jolted by an unsettling incident as a mysterious vessel, carrying slaughtered sailors and one surviving Transylvanian count, crashes into its harbor. As the chaos settles and the crates filled with dirt are unloaded, a series of peculiar occurrences unfurls, with the enigmatic Count Dracula lurking at the heart of it all. Donald Pleasance, Laurence Olivier, and Frank Langella star in John Badham's Dracula from 1979. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
The spider spinning his web for the unwary fly. The blood is the life, Mr. Redfield.
So we have been sadly neglecting our YouTube channel for a long time, but luckily for everyone out there who's still sticking with the YouTube side of it, we're definitely getting back into that. And for those of you who only listen to us on the audio side, there's some good stuff to check out on our YouTube channel. We have some public domain movies, lots of sort of clips and shorts of the show, and then we've got a slightly different version of the show coming out every week there, catching up on our old episodes. So lots of fun stuff to check out on the YouTube channel for the Grindhouse Institute.
The Diary of Jonathan Harker, 3rd of May, 1885. I was forced to travel the last few kilometers on foot before arriving at Castle Dracula. The castle appeared innocuous enough in the warm afternoon sun, and all seemed normal but for one thing. There were no birds singing.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster, and with me as always is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Brian, would you remind Chrissy that I never drink wine?
Did that show up in all 3 films today, or just 2 of them?
I think just the 2 of them,
just
right?
Just 2 of them, right?
I don't know if Christopher Lee said
I don't think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Very exciting show today. We're talking Dracula with 3 L's. And with us today is quite literally the person that wrote the book on Dracula. Bruce Scivally is joining us again. He was on for our The Road to James Bond episode several years ago now at this point, I believe.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, right. It goes so fast. But to remind everyone at home, Bruce has worked as an editor, producer, writer, director, and special effects assistant on music videos, TV specials, feature films, and documentaries. He's the author of the books Billion Dollar Batman, Superman on Film, Television, Radio, and Broadway, co-author of the book James Bond, The Legacy, with John Cork, and for the purposes of our episode today, the Dracula FAQ. He continues to write award-winning screenplays, as we were talking about just earlier, and he's recently completed his first novel, The Last Stage, about the last days of Wyatt Earp.
Wow.
Welcome, Bruce.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back on. Yeah.
We were very excited to talk to you about this one. I mean, we could probably have you on for Batman episodes. We can have you on for more Bond episodes. I think that, you're a great resource, and we really appreciate you joining us again.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Happy to come on to talk about anything, pretty much.
Excellent.
As long as it has to do with movies and old television, I'm there.
You're all about it.
Well, today we're talking old movies. We're talking Dracula from 1931, Horror of Dracula, which is also known as Dracula, from 1958, and then Dracula from 1979. And we titled this one DracuLLLa with the 3 L's.
I wonder what this episode's about.
Because we're talking Lugosi, Christopher Lee, and Frank Langella. So we've got the 3L Draculas today. Pretty interesting concept, and I'm very excited to get into it.
Yeah, totally.
Me too. I have to say the 3 L's, when I look back on it, are all kind of my favorite Draculas out of the hundreds of people who've played the part over the years.
Oh, so specifically these actors were your favorite Draculas, not just the movies that they were in. Got it.
Yeah, and I think they're all very, very good movies in their own right.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We can jump right into Dracula 31. It's been a long time since I'd seen this one, so it was great to revisit. I revisited this one alone, watching it on the small monitor with headphones on, and it was a pretty creepy experience. And it was good to see a movie from the 30s still evoke that kind of terror in me.
Yeah, I have to say, this is one of probably the first films that I ever saw, at least the first one I remember seeing from when I was a kid.
Wow.
Or certainly the first one that I kind of chose to see. Back when I was a little kid growing up in North Alabama in the 1960s, they were still showing the shock theater package of all the early Universal horror films.
Oh, right on.
I wish they
And
still
this
did
is
that.
one of the
On
yeah,
TV?
on TV, yeah, Saturday nights at 10:30, yeah, after the news. So me and my brother, who's a couple years older than I am, we stayed up and watched Dracula. And you watch it now and it seems pretty tame. For me, being like 5 years old at the time, scared the Jesus out of me.
Yeah.
Just the concept that this guy's really dead.
Yeah.
So
Undead.
undead.
Nosferatu.
I mean, this is obviously Bela Lugosi's, I guess, the most known for, right? This character that he's known for outside of maybe White Zombie. But this is probably the thing that people
absolutely.
remember.
Well,
It's
for
this,
me,
I'm
I
sure,
think his
yeah.
best performance is probably as Igor in Son of Frankenstein. But Dracula's the role that defined him. It made him a star. He was like almost 48 years old when he made this movie. He'd played it on Broadway for a few years before and brought it out to the West Coast and performed here and in San Francisco and L.A. And, he was not the first choice of the filmmakers to star in the film because he was pretty much an unknown. He'd been in a few movies. But
Sure.
you couldn't have... It was just that perfect pairing of actor and role that typecast him for the rest of his life.
I am Dracula.
This one really got into the horror quickly. This was probably before the time of doing reveals and slow reveals of the monster. And I didn't remember that within the first 10 minutes of this movie, you already see Dracula coming out of a coffin, roaming around the catacombs of Castle Dracula with his brides.
Well, and he starts off with the little, creeping Nosferatu fingers, coming out of there.
The coffin?
Yeah, right out of the coffin. It very much looks like the Murnau Nosferatu, and maybe it was the Karl Freund influence there because he came over from the German silent era.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on here. First off, they had negotiated with Bram Stoker's widow Florence to get the rights to do the film, and then based it on the play that had been performed first in London, then on Broadway. That was written by an actor named Hamilton Dean. When it came to Broadway, John Balderston kind of Americanized it a bit, and that's kind of the basis for this film. They had gotten one of the only surviving copies at that time of Nosferatu and watched it in preparing this film, which is why you get some shots in this movie that are almost identical to shots from those early scenes in Nosferatu with Harker traveling, actually Hutter, it was called in that film, traveling up to Count Orlok's castle.
Right.
They changed it just enough. Yeah.
For me, Nosferatu is one of the creepiest films ever made. It was financed by a group of Satanists and filmed at an actual castle in Germany. So it's got its own style to it, certainly.
Yeah.
And just the whole the production designer Alvin Grau was, I think, a genius in that whole idea of the vampire as this kind of almost more rat-like
Like a
creature
rat,
than bat-like.
yeah.
You know,
Especially
really,
the teeth.
And those
Yeah.
crazy teeth. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I was going to ask if anyone involved had seen Nosferatu, because I know that, like, both because of the situation with Bram Stoker's widow, and I don't know what, like, how early films like didn't quite have the circulation as we might imagine today. But I as I understood it, like, Nosferatu was kind of thought to be lost for a long time. But apparently they did get to see it, the filmmakers of Dracula, huh?
yeah, that's what I found in my research for the book, is that they had screened Nosferatu and had a look at it, and it was said to be the one surviving copy in America at
Yeah.
that point. Because for those
Wow.
who are listening who don't know, Nosferatu was an unauthorized version. When F.W. Murnau made the film, he didn't bother about getting the rights. He just ripped off the story and renamed the characters. So as soon as it came out, Bram Stoker's widow sued them, and part of the result of the lawsuit is that all copies of the film were supposed to have been destroyed. But thankfully, for the sake of film history, some did survive, and it's, you can find it on YouTube now.
Right.
And
yeah.
I still think it is really the creepiest version of Dracula ever made.
I think some of the scenes in that, I thought we were gonna see Bela Lugosi do it, like when he would come out of like how Count Orloff would come out of the casket just straight up without bending a knee, right? Just kind of float up. I thought Bela Lugosi was gonna do that almost, but they didn't get into that part. So I was like, I was kind of missing that.
Well, speaking of being able to find it on YouTube, just wanted to jump in real quick and plug the fact that we have it on our YouTube page.
There you
So
go.
go check it out there.
It is well worth the look. When I was a kid, I bought a standard 8mm version of it, and watched. So I've seen the movie probably dozens, if not hundreds of times at this point in my life. And I
Yeah.
really appreciated Werner Herzog's remake of it too, in
that was
1979, I think. So.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that. I knew it was around the same time as our other Dracula film, our 70s Dracula film. I was wondering, if that was kind of done at the same time, or if they were just trying to reinvigorate the tale, or what it was. But did they go with Count Orloff in that too? Was it a remake?
No, they called
of-
him Dracula in that one.
Oh, okay.
And it's Klaus Kinski, who worked often with
Yeah.
Herzog. They had this
Interesting looking dude.
hate, love, more hate kind of relationship. But yeah, I mean, Kinski was just a madman, I think, but and Herzog is kind of eccentric in his own right, but
Definitely.
one of my
Yeah.
favorite directors. But that one, again, they filmed it, I think, in Holland. It's got that same sort of look as the silent one.
Yeah, but that one's worth a watch though, as a remake.
I believe so. Yeah, it's it's if you're looking at it as a horror film, it's not very scary, but it is very stylish. Very moody.
Yeah.
There's like a little like psychological horror thing to it. It feels like early Brian De Palma almost. There's a lot of sort of like the wide angle handheld, and there's kind of this like gritty ugliness to it. So it doesn't have the same German expressionism, obviously, as the first one, but as I don't know, the German '70s new wave of early Herzog, yeah. But to pull us back into 1931, we talked about the Nosferatu similar looking fingers coming out of the coffin, but how funny was it? And I had forgotten about this, that there was a bee that came out of a coffin.
Yeah, a tiny coffin, right?
Like a miniature coffin.
That was a cool little added piece of art, I thought.
That was so funny.
Yeah, it was almost like he made so many vampires that he got bored and had to make bugs into vampires too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Maybe
my
it's
God.
just kind of sort of setting up Renfield later on and
Right,
eating the flies and so on, eating the bugs.
Maybe this is a bug that would eat humans and put the shoe on the other foot.
I do have to say though that Lugosi, his hands are like actors within themselves. He had
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
very long,
Very
thin
spindly
fingers in his
and-
way
yeah.
of yeah.
Yeah.
And Langella mimics that later on. So
Yeah, I think Langella, and we'll get to it, I think he was kind of doing a bit of Lugosi in his portrayal of Drac as well, but we'll get there. So what I mean, this was kind of its own story in a way, right? A lot changed from the original source material, the book. I mean, Bram Stoker's novel, mostly around the fact that we changed from Jonathan Harker being our main protagonist to Renfield, at least for the beginning. And then,
yeah, right. He's playing the Harker role at the very beginning. Yeah,
right. We get to see him as Harker as the solicitor, because that actually does happen in the book. Renfield is the first person to go see Dracula, and then Harker is the one that we actually follow. And Renfield has already lost his mind, I think, by the time the novel begins.
Right, he's already gone and come back.
Yeah, we only sort of hear about him. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I thought that was an interesting move, but it kind of worked to condense the story a bit, and I'm sure that's what they were going for with the script.
Yeah, I mean, Stoker's novel, it's, I've read it a couple of times all the way through, maybe 3 times. And it's, for me, it has a sort of flavor and a feeling and a mood to it that none of the movies really have captured. But it's done in this kind of unusual style of it's all told through diary entries and letters and gramophone recordings and all this. But,
and like
people's recollections of what's happened. Yeah.
The Demeter's captain's log and all that, right? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But it all adds up to a very kind of creeping terror kind of feel,
Yeah, and I think was that what he was going for that, was just let's look at a bunch of different perspectives, get all these different points of view, and then you can kind of put it all together as like a puzzle almost.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't realize till I was doing some research on Stoker, I think for the book, and that his uncle was, Stoker's from Ireland, from Dublin. His uncle was Sheridan J. Le Fanu, who wrote Carmilla, which is one of the earlier classic vampire stories.
Right.
Oh, wow.
So I think there was certainly something within his family and within Irish tradition of this kind of vampire lore,
On the throat of each victim, the same 2 marks.
But his book is is really kind of epic. I think Coppola's movie tried to cram more of the book into it, and in my estimation, kind of to its detriment, because
too much, you mean?
Yeah, the pacing in that film just seems really off to me. Like it's kind of languorous in the beginning, and then they get to the final half hour, and oh crap, we've got 3/4 of the story to cram into the final 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I think that's the most epic part of the story is when they actually start chasing him back to Transylvania, and it is kind of compressed into about a 4-minute section in the film, and it's like, okay, he's all cut up now, and Quincy and I guess Harker, whoever else was there. Quincy, I think, was the American.
And Quincy and Seward, who's a younger man in the novel.
Right.
I could not help overhearing your name. Might I inquire if you are the Dr. Seward whose sanitarium is at Whitby?
Why, yes.
Also, tying us back into with the 31 and the Nosferatu thing, like one place that kind of felt I could really feel the German expressionism was, not only sort of maybe the entrance of Dracula, where he comes down and he's only in silhouette, right? In this one, I feel like there are so many entrances in these.
We see him full frame in this one, I believe.
Yeah, in Nosferatu, you see him going upstairs as just a shadow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a kind of classic image. You never get anything like that in the Lugosi Dracula, but there are certainly German expressionistic touches. I mean, it's made at Universal, which was formed by Karl Laemmle, who was a German immigrant. And you mentioned Karl Freund, who was the photographer on a lot of the Murnau films in Germany.
Right.
And, he photographs the 1931 Dracula. And I think particularly in those opening shots where the camera's moving through the castle, to me, that's very much more of a Karl Freund influence than a Todd Browning influence, And then Freund goes on to direct The Mummy, which is and Mad Love with Peter Lorre, which are both pretty stylish horror films.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I was kind of building toward, though, was like there's another shot that like felt very Freund to me, which is that like when the boat arrives in the harbor, we're kind of hearing this like group of people, discovering it and like, what the hell's happening? Where is this thing? And look at the captain; he's lashed to the wheel, and like we just see this like dead captain corpse.
I think in that one you mostly
hanging
see
on the wheel,
shadow.
but
Yeah,
in
see a
shadow.
in the wheel.
No, yeah, exactly. It's all played in shadow, and like, and there's something. Yes, it's expressionistic, but especially for a movie in the early 30s, this it felt very visceral to see how he was hanging up by his arm, and the thing that was holding him up there was the fact that he was lashed to it. But that he was completely gone.
We see Renfield for the first time too, and the people are like, "Oh, he's mad." They're talking to each other, and "Oh my God, he's gone mad." And he's like, "Ha ha ha," pulling the same thing that they did in Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Right. Yeah, Dwight Frye, that really, again, kind of typecast him. He was sort of a character actor at the time, and after that just played, he went on to be the Hunchback Fritz in Frankenstein later in that same year, and pretty much played hunchbacks and assistants in monster roles after that.
I thought he stole this film. I know this film's known for Lugosi,
Totally.
but I thought Frye was awesome. I thought he was very creepy, and honestly, that shot of him well, it's not the Demeter, it's the Vesta, but
In the movie, it's
the
the
boat.
Vesta, yeah.
Right. But that was one of the scariest things I'd seen, and I was pretty creeped out. It was just that low or that high angle
looking down into the hold as he's looking up and laughing maniacally. And I remember reading that the cinematographer had lit that in such a way that the way he's holding onto the rails, you can almost kind of see that it's like that it's a spider, where he's the head and body of the spider.
Right.
And his arms and the rails are the spider
Oh, I
legs,
totally get that. Yeah.
So you get a lot of those kind of touches in this movie. And it's one of the first Hollywood movies, I think, that just fully embraced the idea that there's a monster here. We're not going to try to explain this away at the end, like London After Midnight, where there's a vampire, but in the end it's just an actor trying to get someone to confess to a crime,
This is an ancient monster that's coming after, trying to take over London, or one city at a time, I guess.
Yeah, I've always, at one point I read through Dracula and just thought, what is Dracula's purpose in this? And it became pretty clear to me once he gets to London, he's hiding coffins in different houses throughout the city with his native earth. And I kind of gathered that he had sort of, after 400 years being near his castle in Transylvania, people were on to him.
Yeah.
And he was having a hard time getting new victims and getting blood every
Right.
night. So he goes to this big, massive, teeming metropolitan city where he can hide in plain sight.
Yeah, no one's going to take his invites anymore, right? Because too many people didn't come back from those invites. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting you pointed out, because I mean, in all three of these movies, it feels like his motivation for leaving is always like seeing either Lucy or Mina or whoever's picture catches his attention, and that kind of gets him rocking and rolling. Versus in the book, where you're right that it's like he needs to start farming in a different part of the earth here.
Right.
Yeah.
But just good to wrap up or go back on that Renfield laugh moment. Like, that was also sort of played off of that shadow of the captain. And we hear Renfield long before we see him. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like, as a movie that was, one of the first talkies, that's a pretty advanced use of sound.
Right.
I know in M, they did some things that were similar to that, but that
the
too
whistling
kind of, the whistling and like seeing and hearing things, hearing things way before you see them. And like his very Renfield in this one, his very trademark laugh, that little tight jawed, like kind of wheezing like a torn bagpipe. It's just this really like intense sound, and it was scary and haunting to now.
Right.
I mean, imagine that 90 years ago.
Wise man.
Yeah, I mean, this, when it came out, was considered a very frightening film. Children would scream in the theaters watching it. So, which, again, I saw when I was a little kid, and it scared me. Again, Lugosi's charisma, I think, carries a lot of the weight of it. I saw it on the big screen for the first time some years ago, Fathom Events doing these things where they show it along with the Spanish version that was shot concurrently. Yeah. And, after years of seeing it only on TV screens, basically, when you see it on a big movie screen, Lugosi's performance really shines through. I mean, he really commands the screen when he's on.
Yeah. Like a lot of the subtle things he's doing where he looks very still, but there's a lot going on with his eyes and all that kind of stuff.
And his whole presence. And in in all three of the versions you're talking about today, the best scenes for me in them are when the direct confrontations with Van Helsing.
Yes.
In the 31 movie, Van Helsing's played by Edward Van Sloan, who had also starred with Lugosi in the Broadway version. When they brought Todd Browning on to direct it, Browning's first choice to play Dracula, and the Laemmles, frankly, was Lon Chaney. Lon Chaney Sr. Because Browning had made several films with him. There's one called The Terror, if you've never seen it, with Chaney and Joan Crawford. It is the strangest, weirdest, most mesmerizing film you'll probably ever see. But Chaney, I think, would have been I feel like he would have been a more grotesque kind of Dracula. He would have gone in for doing one of his weird makeups.
Right.
Whereas again with Lugosi, he's playing it almost more like a kind of a demented Valentino figure with the really brilliantine hair and all this. Not at all like he's described in the novel.
Yeah.
Romantic and slicked back and very put together, and he's really a count, right? I mean, he has that feeling, especially because he kind of stands with his chest out quite a bit, especially when they were in the theater. Right, when they're in the theater talking and he first meets Dr. Seward, and I think Harker was there, as well as Lucy.
And,
I think
and
Harker
Mina,
and Lucy were together in this one. He really has like kind of a presence, and he makes everyone look a little smaller than him just from being on screen with them, and he just had that nice stature.
Even when he first comes in and they're on the platform and he's down kind of below them a bit, he's still his persona towers over them.
Right, exactly.
Well, and then obviously this is different than the book, where in the book he Dracula, that is, works hard not to come off as sounding foreign to English speakers, and then in the 58 and 79 versions, both of those Draculas come off as native English speakers, because they are, but in this one there's something just so uncanny, and it's like the rhythms of his speech and how he hits certain words, I never drink wine, and it's or whatever it is.
Well, there's a musicality to it too. It's, I never drink wine.
Right,
it's
right,
up
right.
and a down.
Yeah, and he having that extra layer on it also kind of makes it so that anytime he does something weird that is a vampire thing, everyone around him in England just they kind of stay a little polite, because maybe it's just a weird Eastern European
custom thing. Yeah.
Whereas I think in the later movies, particularly the first time we sit down with Frank Langella as Dracula, when he's meeting the whole gang, he does a lot of weird things in that, where it's no medicine, tainting the blood, and all this stuff, and but because he's so sort of fluent in English and just seems like he sort of is amongst his peers, it feels a little weird that everyone just accepts what he says. You know what I mean? Whereas if he had more of the Bela Lugosi sort of bizarre personality, and and way he talks and the way he carries himself, like you were saying, it might make some of their behaviors, the English people's behaviors, more accepting of his oddities. Maybe he's just eccentric and not a vampire.
I thought that's kind of what they were going for with Coppola's Dracula. I thought Dracula in that was extremely eccentric, and he felt extremely not from London.
Right.
It reminds me of my own castle in Transylvania. Oh, Lucy, you're so romantic.
Laugh all you like. I think he's fascinating.
When Dracula came out, being one of the first real horror films made in America, and certainly the first sound horror film, I think, it became a big hit. And actually, Universal had lost money the year before, having spent tons of money on a film called King of Jazz with Paul Whiteman, who was a popular band leader then. But that lost a ton of money.
Was that like a mockbuster of the jazz singer type of thing?
No, it was. I'm not
Like a
sure
ripoff?
what the plot of it was, but it was, I think, filming in two-strip Technicolor and kind of
wow.
big budget musical extravaganza, but didn't really go over well at the box office like they'd hoped. So Dracula sort of saved Universal's butt financially.
Wow.
And it wouldn't be the first time that happened. They were in a slump again 10 years later. Son of Frankenstein kind of got him out of that. And 10 years after that, again, they were in a financial slump. And Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, which was the only other time that Lugosi actually played Dracula in a film.
Oh.
Everyone thinks he made all these Dracula movies. He did play other vampires, but he only played Dracula on film twice.
Interesting. So Bela Lugosi saved them twice. Saved them from being undead. Yeah.
Saved them twice. Yeah. By the time you get to Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, where you've got the two biggest comedians at Universal making fun of these monsters, although in a kind of loving way. It's really a good monster film and a good comedy film that coexist pretty nicely, I think.
Yeah.
But after that, monsters really were kind of passé, not really threatening anymore. You got into more of the nuclear monsters of giant insects and Godzilla and so on. And then Hammer Films had the idea of resuscitating those old monsters. And they'd been doing mostly radio adaptations and TV adaptations in the movies. But they wanted to revive first Frankenstein, which they did. And their idea was to do them in color and not shy away from the gorier aspects of them,
Right.
and also do them on a budget. They were all pretty low budget, but for low budget films, they really do have a great look and style.
Yeah, for sure.
To them,
Great sets. Yeah.
And most of them star either Peter Cushing or Christopher Lee, or at least in the early days, often both of them.
Yeah.
And anything that Peter Cushing's in, he lifts it immediately into a different level.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally.
And so that's where Dracula 58 then came from. Is that part of that resurgence or their, yeah.
Right. First they did Curse of Frankenstein, and which spawned its own series, which unlike the Universal movies where the Frankenstein sequels follow the monster, with Hammer, the Frankenstein series follows Dr. Frankenstein, which is a different take on it. And again, I love all those films. And then that was a pretty big hit, so they followed it up with Dracula, which is kind of the reverse of what Universal had done. And when it came to do Dracula, they got the actor who had played Frankenstein's monster, who was 6'4" Christopher Lee, to come in and do Dracula. And besides being very tall, I always thought Peter Cushing was kind of a short guy, and he wasn't. He was about 6 feet tall as well. But because he often appeared next to Christopher Lee...
He's dwarfed, yeah.
Right. It's like Mars and Michael Jordan in those old Nike ads.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like, I had the pleasure of working on a project with Christopher Lee, and I came up to like his shoulder, But he was very much a towering presence, and give that plus that big deep voice of his,
Right.
I thought this was a really good portrayal of Van Helsing with Peter Cushing. I thought that this was my favorite of the three, probably. But I also called this movie The Adventures of Grand Moff Tarkin and Alfred Pennyworth, because I didn't realize that Alfred from the 89 Batman is
that's right, Michael
Seward,
Duff,
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And again, like with the Universal Dracula, it was filmed on a budget. I actually think the Hammer Dracula cost less to make than the Lugosi one.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But, they had the advantage of the English countryside and some old British estates and very good production design. I mean, again, Hammer was great at getting the most out of what they had,
Well, I think another big thing that I guess we didn't really address in the 31 version is that, like, the other advantage that Hammer and everyone else had coming after this was that they were coming after Dracula. Like, they already, the audiences already had an expectation of what Dracula means and what this monster is going to entail.
All the rules and everything with it.
Some of the rules, but like also to know, like, have the audience always be on edge with Dracula. Whereas, I don't know if you remember that there was that kind of bizarre scene between Mina and Lucy in the 31 Dracula, where one of them, I can't remember, it was Lucy, maybe, who was like, castles, Dracula, Transylvania. Like, she's going to get whisked off her feet by this, royalty or whatever.
I think he's wonderful.
Like, no one would ever do that scene after the 31 Dracula. It's like, because the audience's expectation is like, what are you, crazy? Like, of course not.
They went for the monster in this one. Christopher Lee was a straight up murdering monster. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, Christopher Lee is the most feral of all the actors who played Dracula. He is very much like an animal in a human skin.
He only really has one section where he's talking as a proper gentleman with Harker when Harker first shows up, and then after that, it is on. He is covered in blood by the rest of the movie, and he's really a monster, like you said, like a feral monster.
It's funny, like this movie, like speaking of the feral thing, it's like. I had never seen this one. It is one of those things where I was only aware of it because of that one shot, which is that like the famous shot from the movie where Christopher Lee bursts through the door. There's that insane close up, and he's got blood dripping down his chin and his fangs exposed.
Right.
And you're right. Like feral is the exact way to sort of describe the way he plays it in this one.
Yeah, I think in this one, they, unlike the other two, which were both based on the same John Balderston, Hamilton Dean play, this one went back to the source material a little bit.
Right, especially the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, but again, because they're working on such a limited budget, they have to, make a lot of changes to it and pretty much keep it all just within England and
right.
A little bit of Dracula at the beginning. But they do change the story around with an interesting twist, I thought, of Harker going to Castle Dracula to kill Dracula.
Yeah, that was the mission right off the bat. That kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I was so surprised when he was sitting there reading his diary, and it was like, and I have to, do this thing, and God willing, I'm going to kill him. And it's like, wait, forever end his reign of terror. And it's like, wait a second, he's a vampire hunter?
Right.
Apparently working in cahoots with Van Helsing,
Because how they started that film was that same journal entry from Stoker's novel of Harker's talking about how things turned cold when he walked into or came past the threshold of the castle and everything was there were no birds singing wherever I was or all that's right. So there was a lot of mysterious ghostly stuff happening. And then all of a sudden it just takes its own turn and becomes its own movie. But at the beginning of it, I was like, oh, they might be following a little closer to, what the novel was. And that was kind of the end of it. But still, it's kind of its own thing. And they did a really neat job with this one. I thought this was a really fun vampire movie.
And very much like the novel in the sense that in the novel, there aren't that many scenes that Dracula is central to, that he's a part of.
Right.
But his presence hangs over the entire thing, and he's talked about a lot, And this movie's very much like that, because Christopher Lee's in it less than 10 minutes, I think. But
for sure,
you certainly feel his presence throughout.
Yeah.
Count Dracula.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house. I must apologize for not being here to greet you personally, but I trust that you have found everything you needed.
When Van Helsing first gets there, and you're hoping and expecting Christopher Lee to be in that stone bathtub, open-faced coffin, and it turns out no, it was
Harker.
What was it? Harker?
Harker, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because there was no Renfield in this one, right?
There was no Renfield in this one.
No.
Yeah. But I loved how Van Helsing just gets right to business in this one. It is right to stakes in the heart. I mean, without question. And it's also Peter Cushing, so it makes it so much more fun. But I thought he was a great Van Helsing in this one. I like movies where you see the person that's a real expert on screen putting things together or using tools and all that, and he was really good with that. While they did that in the 31 with the small compact mirror and things, so he couldn't, see. But in this one, he had, the garlic flowers, and he was pulling out the wolf's bane and all these, different tools and the stakes and everything. And he was ready to be a Van Helsing vampire hunter, like as you know him today.
Yeah, again, Peter Cushing's such a good actor, that you believe everything he does. And in the face of it, these are pretty ridiculous, unbelievable situations. But that's the thing that makes the Hammer film so good is none of the actors ever play it tongue-in-cheek. I mean, you do get some characters on the periphery who are comedy relief, you know.
All right, the guy with the toll booth there that, he was pissed off that they kept running through his toll booth. I thought that was good. Yeah. But you need that moment of levity, right? Right. It would be a pretty dark film had they not had that little moment.
And by the time you get to the end, it's like Errol Flynn, jumping up and running down the table and leaping to the curtains. I mean, it's
that was amazing.
Yeah.
Very fun.
So I think it is the best of the Hammer Dracula films. Although I do like Dracula Has Risen from the Grave and Taste of Blood of Dracula. It came later. Christopher Lee, after a certain point, really felt that none of them were faithful enough for his taste to the Stoker novel. Interestingly, in Christopher Lee's interpretation of Dracula in all the films except Scars of Dracula, he never turns into mist. He never turns into a wolf. He never turns into a bat. You see him in Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. He crashes through a window and just kind of runs across the rooftops. He never turns into a bat and flies away or into a wolf. Yeah. So it's pretty much just a humanoid monster. But in Scars of Dracula, he does turn into a bat in one scene, and you get that iconic sort of shot from the novel of Dracula scaling the castle wall in Scars of Dracula. But it's not one of the better films.
That's got that Batman effect, or the 60s Batman effect when they would walk up the walls and it was just the camera pointed sideways and it looked like they were walking up the building. Same kind of effect, yeah.
But I just when I was a kid really loved the Christopher Lee films, and then again, having an opportunity to meet him was quite a thrill. Which I'll tell just a little story here. It's when I was doing the James Bond DVDs, and we arranged a lunch with Christopher Lee to see if he would narrate some of them, of our documentaries.
Wow.
And, I came prepared with a copy of his autobiography to get him to sign it and all this. And I'd read the autobiography, which, if you read it, about 80% of it is golf course stories. His autobiography might as well be called, Golf Courses I Have Played On by Christopher
What was his
Lee.
handicap? Yeah.
Yeah. But he says in that he and Peter Cushing, up until Peter Cushing passed away, they would call each other every day. And they both loved the old Warner Brothers cartoons. So when they called each other, they would talk in these Warner Brothers cartoon voices when they answered the phone. And I turned to him and said, with your deep voice, I just can't imagine you doing a Warner Brothers cartoon character. Before I finished saying that, he goes, "Great suffering succotash."
So he is a fun guy then.
Yeah, he certainly had a sense of humor about himself, I think. And then
he's in Gremlins too. He had to have some sort of sense of humor.
Rabies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Later on, we did a DVD for.
I've already got rabies.
Yeah, for Hound of the Baskerville, where Peter Cushing is a great Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And went over and interviewed Christopher Lee for that, and also for Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where he plays Mycroft, Holmes's brother.
Yeah.
Which he says he wore a kind of bald head cap in it. Honestly, it's I think the only film he ever did without his hairpiece.
Interesting.
At least later films, because as Dracula, he always wore the same sort of gray and brown tinged wig. Later on. And you can kind of see it in Horror of Dracula when at the end when he's bending over Van Helsing like he's going to bite him, and some of the hair is kind of forward a bit. So
I thought that's just what happens to vampires. I chalked it up to just part of being a vampire. You mentioned some of the gore and some of the special effects in this one. They did kind of go for it, especially kind of a big epic ending for Dracula. He didn't just die or disappear from the sunlight. He really did get burned to death, and
Well, even the first, right after the credits, the first shot, we see the title Dracula, and we get like about
blood.
18 drips of
they did not
stage blood.
It didn't end. It just kept dripping. I love that.
I think it's always very bright red blood in these movies. I think they called it Kensington Red.
Okay.
And also. To my knowledge,
across the pond, it's Kensington Red.
Yes, to my knowledge, Christopher Lee was the first Dracula in English, or first vampire for that matter, in English-speaking films to be seen with fangs.
That's right, because Bela Lugosi didn't have the fangs, right?
Didn't wear fangs.
Right.
Yep, and Langella didn't either, and he played him later on.
But there's just one more thing, Mr. Harker. I have to go out, and I will not be back until after sundown tomorrow. But until then, please look upon this house as your own.
It's funny, in the horror of Dracula, or AKA Dracula 1958, even though it is kind of a lower budget movie, there were several moments where there was a lot of things that, felt very sort of cinematic. Like I love when Christopher Lee first comes in. It's like Lucy goes to like open her window, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I'll lay in bed all night." And then she like opens the window for him, and she's like laying there like waiting for him, and then he finally appears, and he shows up in silhouette, takes 2 steps forward, he's in light, takes 2 steps forward, he's like half in darkness, takes 2 steps forward, it's like, and he goes through about like 8 different lighting setups there, and his face just changes with light and shadow, and it feels very, very sort of German expressionistic with the way that the sort of light and shadow were dancing across his face, and that, I mean, and it sort of ends with him throwing up his cowl, Batman style. But it, that whole shot, I mean, it was just one shot, and he walks kind of around the bed to get to her. But just the lighting piece of that was really kind of thrilling, even for kind of a static shot.
Yeah, and in that scene, I think it's Melissa Stribling playing, I think she's called Lucy in this one, who's Harker's wife. And I think Terence Fisher, the director, who, all the best Hammer horror films are directed by Terence Fisher. He really had a great cinematic style, as you were saying. But she was having trouble kind of getting the right look that he wanted. And he finally said to her, pulled her aside and said, "Look, just play it like you've been made love to all night long, and it's just been like the greatest lovemaking of your life." And then she nailed it on the next take, so to speak.
I did.
Exactly.
That is something that's brought up in the Wikipedia, though, that one of the quotes from Fisher was his greatest contribution to the Dracula myth was to bring out the underlying sexual element of this creature, and it did. I mean, that's really what it. It's in essence like a sexually transmitted disease, right? I mean, you get
and it is a
Dracula.
penetration,
right?
But that's the thing that I think the Christopher Lee movies kind of introduce into the vampire films, is that the women aren't shying away from Dracula; they're kind of throwing themselves at him,
opening the windows for him, letting him in.
Sensual, sexual creature.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And especially when you get to the later films, every time he bites one of the women, they're practically like orgasming in his arms.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah, I mean, especially in the '79 version, where they, at least the version we watched, or I watched, I should say. So the theatrical version apparently had sort of normal color timing. In the John Badham preferred color timing that's sort of available on home video ever since it's been available. It's always been this sort of desaturated thing, but there's one scene in particular where it's not that way, which is where Dracula is what looks like seducing Mina, and it feels like when he gets there, it's not because he's thirsty,
right?
Or not in that way. And but it is. It's totally. It's played like a sex scene,
right?
Like the color just goes out, cranked up to 11, and the whole time it feels like the way you'd shoot like an erotic thriller or something, and it's played very explicitly on those tropes.
Yeah, before we skip ahead to that one, I'll do a quick wrap-up here of the Christopher Lee movie. See, again, was reluctant to come back to Dracula, so the next sequel to the 1958 Dracula, or Horror Dracula, which is what it was called in the U.S., because Universal released it and didn't want people to think they were just re-releasing a Bela Lugosi movie, right?
Right.
But in the sequel, Brides of Dracula, as with Frankenstein, they follow Van Helsing instead of following Dracula, and he's going off to kill this other Germanic vampire. Another very good film, by the way. And then 1965, I believe it is, we get to Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and then that kind of kicks off the Christopher Lee series of Dracula films, where you get like 3 or 4 pretty good ones in the 60s up to about 1970. And then the last few, it's like, not much to recommend those, Dracula 80, 1972, or Satanic Rites,
I hear a lot about Dracula, Prince of Darkness. I heard that it's a great one.
That's the one where I don't think he's got a line of dialogue in it.
Really?
Wow.
Because again, Christopher Lee felt like the dialogue was kind of dumb and didn't want to deliver it. So when he appears, he's just kind of hissing like a snake, and almost, So
I don't think he had a line in The Mummy either, right? He was just the monster.
No? So,
Kool-Aid Manning through the walls and all that. Yeah.
Yep. But certainly, if you've never seen the '58 Dracula, I think it really holds up well still.
It's great.
And I think of these three, it's the only one I don't think I've ever seen it on a movie screen, which I'd love to someday. And I know they did a re-release on Blu-ray some years ago, because there were some cuts that were made in it by the censors in Britain at the time that were restored from a Japanese print that had been found released on Blu-ray. But it's a little bit more of his disintegration at the end, and I think one of the biting scenes has a little more to it. So.
Got it.
Cool.
So if you want to see it, get that new Blu-ray disc that has the British Film Institute restored version of it on there.
Hell yeah.
Is he safe? Forgot in all this Who? Dracula. Oh, yes, he's the only one who is.
But then, after that, after the Christopher Lee era, there was a lot of low-budget Dracula films over the years, most not really worth talking about. But in the 70s, there was a guy named Radu Florescu who wrote a book called In Search of Dracula, and with a co-author whose name I'm forgetting now, unfortunately. But that book was, sold a lot of copies in the early 70s. It was around the time of all these sort of occult books and the, In Search of Ancient Astronauts and all that sort of movement.
Eric von Daniken.
Exactly. So it's just an era where there was a lot of that sort of, fringes of culture stuff entering into the culture. And that book was the one that kind of introduced Vlad Tepes to the world, Although Stoker, when he created the character, he had taken a trip up to Whitby, England, which I went to, and I was researching my Dracula book and loved it. I'll put in a plug here. Go to Whitby. It's up in Yorkshire. Beautiful part of the country, and I stayed at the Chiltern Guest House, which had very nice people running it who fix you a very good breakfast every morning, and you can walk down.
Were you covered in wolfsbane and garlic?
Garlic flowers?
I was not. I wasn't terribly worried, but that they're very proud of their Dracula heritage, because Stoker, when he was writing the novel, went into a library there to do some research on Transylvania and read a little bit about Vlad Tepes and how Vlad Tepes was known as the son of the devil, or in the local language, Dracul. And as the son of, it was DracuLLLa. So he then writes that down on a notepad, that he had, where because he was going to call the vampire Count Vampire. Not quite the same, right?
No.
But he wrote Dracula, then he writes Dracula again, then he writes Dracula all in capital letters, and then underlines it. And it's like, yes, I'm choosing this name, So that's where he got the name. And so it is sort of, in that way, sort of kind of based in the Stoker novel on Vlad Tepes.
This is Vlad the Impaler we're talking about, not Vladislav the
Impaler,
Poker, right? From What We Do in the Shadows.
Right. Yeah. And again, Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, he was, was a ruler of Romania back in the day, 500 years ago. So you get a little bit of Stoker talking about, having Dracula talk about that to Harker in the beginning of, the blood that runs through these veins and so on.
Right.
But also, when you're in Whitby, there's kind of these two cliffs with a river running between them. And you can sit on one and look across at the other, and there's the ruins of the old abbey, which I swear to God, it's, you can see Stoker sitting there thinking, No, thinking Castle Dracula. There it is.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Or Carfax Abbey, perhaps.
Yeah.
And in the novel, he set part of the novel in Whitby, because that is where the Demeter that's carrying Dracula from Transylvania crashes into England at Whitby Harbor.
Right.
And there's a little bit in there of Lucy and Mina as they're talking, walking up the 99 steps to the ruins of the old abbey. And the 99 steps are still there. And when you're looking across, by the way, to look at that abbey, there's a bench you can sit on that's called Mina's Bench. It's
Really?
got a little plaque on it. So they really embraced the whole Dracula thing. They've got a little Dracula museum there. And I even took a little boat ride out where they sort of take you out and bring you back in. And they say, over there's the beach where Dracula's ship arrived and brought him
Right
into
on.
England. And he leapt off as a dog and off into the night.
Right.
It's also a little infamous because with the abbey being built up on a cliff, it has been known from time to time that some of the older graves there near the cliffside, they'll just kind of fall through and fall down onto the beach.
Oh.
So
Watch your head.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it does have a kind of macabre aspect
Yeah.
to it, but a delightful, despite that, really delightful little town. And ever since I've left, I've been dying to go back. And they have a goth festival there twice a year.
Literally dying to go back.
So there's my
Yeah.
plug for Whitby and the Chiltern Guest House. So, looking forward to going back someday.
So how did Bruce end up dying? Oh, he was walking on the beach and a stone
Coffin fell on
hit him
him.
on the head.
Got hit by a corpse. Yeah. I think that'd be the perfect way for me to go out. is to be,
Got pancaked by a corpse.
yeah.
That's a good segue because Whitby Beach, like you said, was where the Demeter crashed, and that's where the wolf jumped out of Dracula, right?
And that's how the 79 Dracula begins. Because again, Dracula had become sort of a figure, especially with all the comedians doing their Lugosi imitations, kind of a comedy figure by the 60s, and you had Grandpa Munster, who's supposed to be Dracula,
Right.
But then, in this around 1975, 76, a decision was made to revive the old Balderston Dean play of Dracula that had made Lugosi a star on Broadway, and they did. And there had been some revivals in the 60s and early 70s, but this was going to be the first big full-on Broadway production of it since the 1920s. And Edward Gorey, who was a very well-known illustrator, designed the sets for it. So as a play, the sets were all basically like blackline illustrations. If you see photos of it, it's pretty amazing. But every scene had one item in it that was red. It should be glasses of red wine, or a rose in a vase, or the blood, or whatever. And Langella was chosen to play Dracula. He was a very well-known Broadway actor at that point, and had actually already played Zorro in a TV remake of the Marco Zorro in the early 70s. But probably best known at that point, film-wise, for...
Diary of a Mad Housewife, that thing?
Diary of a Mad Housewife, thank you. Yes. He plays the sort of Lothario in that, who's a character not terribly unlike the way he plays Dracula. but he had played Dracula in a revival of the 20s play before he did it again on Broadway,
So similar how Bela Lugosi did it. I mean, stage first and then brought it to screen. And, yeah.
Right, so they do the Broadway play. The Broadway play becomes a sensation, and then immediately there's a Dracula musical that's put on at the same time there. And after Langella did it for the initial run of the play for one season, and then he went off to do other things. And I think Raul Julia came in to replace him next, and there was a touring version of it that Jeremy Brett starred in before he did Sherlock Holmes. So there are quite a few other Draculas after that. And one of the performances that Langella's doing, Walter Mirisch, the film producer, had gone to see it with his wife. And Mirisch had been interested in trying to revive Dracula for a while, and he's watching this play and thinking, well, this is it. We'll just redo the play and make it a movie. So they do, but they kind of reinvented it in a way in that they didn't have the Edward Gorey kind of... I mean, that's the sort of thing that works great when you're there live seeing it on a Broadway stage. Seeing it recreated as a film set wouldn't have worked, I don't think. You would have literally been watching a filmed play at that point.
Right.
Which still, I wish someone had filmed that play. I'd love to see it. You know?
But that sounds like a black and white set with those contrasty items,
elements.
right?
Yeah.
So, but this was, I mean, according to Wikipedia, this was originally planned to be shot in black and white, and they were trying to go for that.
I think that was Badham's idea in the beginning when he was chosen to direct, but
shut down immediately by the studio.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Like, thanks, no thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also, quite honestly, at that time, there were so few movies being made in black and white that it cost more to do a black and white film than one in color.
There you go.
You know, so that may have been part of the consideration, but yeah, they get John Badham to direct, who was coming off of Saturday Night Fever. You know, he was not the guy you'd immediately think of to direct a quote-unquote horror film.
No.
On the other hand, their approach to it, wasn't that Dracula was so much a horror film as it was a love story.
Right.
You know, and which, again, not unlike the Lugosi one, which when it was promoted, when it first came out, it came out a few days before Valentine's Day in 1931. And the newspaper ads would say, "The story of the strangest love ever shown." You know?
So that became a date night movie, and it just exploded. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Langella's interpretation of it, I think, is what makes the movie work, because he's not coming in playing a monster, playing a heavily accented Lugosi figure, or doing it the Christopher Lee way. He plays it he's the Byronic Dracula. He's playing it like a character from an Emily Bronte or Jane Austen novel, you know.
Yeah. He's Don Juan de Dracula?
Don Juan de Dracula. There it is.
But, very sort of dashing romantic portrayal of Dracula.
I mean, he's the most romantic of these Draculas, or the romanticism is the heaviest, but on the other side of that, the gore and the violence in this one is kicked up to 11 versus these other films. I mean, this one gets pretty nasty.
Because it is 1979, and you've had The Shining, I think, by that point. Actually, Shining came out the next year, I think, 1980.
Not quite, yeah.
Well, it's still the 70s. We're pretty...
But you'd had The Exorcist,
There you go.
And you'd had some other sort of gory horror movies and so on. So, yeah, and because Langella's Dracula is more, no fangs, no blood, all that sort of stuff, that's why you get the ancillary characters being more made up and monstrous and so on, to kind of give it that horror movie feel. But you also, when I first saw it, it was the summer before my senior year of high school. So me and a friend of mine, we go off to see this movie because I'm a big Dracula nut. I have to see the new Dracula film. It's opening day there in Huntsville, Alabama, at the local theater. And it's one of these multiplex things. He had just finished reading the Amityville Horror, and the film version of that opened on the same day, at least in Huntsville.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and I thought the Amityville Horror was a pretty silly movie, entertaining.
Yeah,
silly.
It's very silly. Yeah.
Get out.
But get out. I've always said, you get some noisy neighbors you don't like, just hide a walkie-talkie in their wall and get on your other. Get out. But anyway, when seeing the movie in the theater, I loved it. I think I went back a second time. And I was particularly struck even then by how lush it looked, how saturated the color was, Really beautiful film to look at.
Yeah.
So when it got around to being finally released on DVD, and John Badham was like, "Hey, you know what? I always wanted to do it in black and white."
Yeah.
For me, and I think people like me who had seen the film on its original release or seen it when it was shown on HBO soon after, seeing the sort of desaturated color version, it's like, throwing paint on the Mona Lisa, sort of. It's like, no, don't. So it's interesting in its way.
The one we looked at was the desaturated John Badham version. But luckily for you, Bruce, and anyone who saw it in its original theatrical run, Shout Factory has a Blu-ray where you can watch both versions now, where you can watch the theatrical colored version or the desaturated John
Thank God
Badham
for
version.
Shout Factory, man.
Yeah.
They're really great at preserving this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it totally they are. But what's funny about the desaturated thing, I mean, it very much stands out. Like I was really kind of taken back by it watching this. It's not black and white, and it's not the rich color that Bruce, you saw in the theater. and they kind of just split the baby on this one, and it's kind of in a weird spot.
To me, it always had the effect of watching like a 10th generation VHS copy
Yeah.
of something.
That's
where
exactly
the
what it
colors are
felt
really
like.
washed out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Sort
seeing
of like
it with
sun faded almost. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm a big fan of the original, but the other thing I think makes the movie really, really, really work for me is the John Williams score, because I think
Absolutely.
it's one of his best.
It hits you in the face right away when we're on the Demeter, and that whole opening scene I think is an amazing introduction, and followed up with because we get into the castle. It's that big flyby over the water with the John Williams score and the credits rolling.
Speaking of which, it's
beautiful.
It's the teaming up of the team from Star Wars 2 years earlier of John Williams and Gilbert Taylor. Taylor
For the cinematography.
The cinematographer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I did the James Bernard music for the Hammer films. Really love all that, and certainly his Dracula theme. I think Christopher Lee, and I immediately hear that dum bum bum.
Right.
But it's got that effect that a lot of composers would use sometime. Let's put the character's name in music, Dracula.
Right.
Which it's John Williams did later on with Superman. Superman. Da, 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 da. So.
Speaking of score, so like we didn't talk about this, but in the 1931 version,
no music.
There is no score. There's kind of an opening titles.
You get Swan Lake at the beginning, which is also used again for The Mummy a couple of years later.
Yeah.
And when they go
also directed by Carl Freund, the cinematographer on Dracula.
And when they go to the opera in Dracula, I think, or whatever it is, you hear some music playing
some
that.
kind of like source music, yeah.
But that's one of those things where they kind of, as with the boat captain and the voices, it's like, what's the cheapest way we can do this? We'll show the captain's shadow. We'll hear people talking about it. They'll get the idea that there's crowds of people around, but we don't have to hire anyone but a couple of voice actors.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there were so many scenes in the 31 where you definitely needed that sting, when the cross would come out and he'd block his face, or when the mirror would show and he would break the mirror and all that stuff. Like there was nothing.
Cuts his finger and there's that really fast push in.
Yeah, like there's nothing there.
What's great is like, so, and it's also like a thing of early 30s movies. Apparently they didn't have a lot of score. That's kind of
It took
part
them
of the
a
early
while.
talkies, yeah.
It took them a while to develop overdubbing and sound cutting, sound editing.
Yeah.
To go along with the picture. So a lot of times in those very, very early sound movies, if you're hearing music, they're literally playing the music off camera a little bit.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
But what was wild about the 31 version, though, on the score thing, was that in the late 90s, Philip Glass did a soundtrack for it, and I was thinking about it, like, man, like, when was the last time I saw Dracula? It was probably when that came out, and I saw the Philip Glass version the last time I saw it, and it kind of struck me this time. I was like, geez, there's no music in this, right?
My problem with the Philip Glass score to the original is it's almost wall-to-wall music. There's never any
I was about
pause,
to say, like, it's not even like, exactly.
The silence is really powerful in that movie. It needs to be there.
That's one of the things that makes it creepy and powerful. And I think, again, Todd Browning
feels like you're there.
Feel for that, yeah. And
And
in both the 31 version and the Langella version, my favorite scenes are the sort of second sort of showdown with Dracula and Van Helsing, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And with Lugosi's, it's just because with his accent, I love the way he says the word learned. Now that you have learned what you have learned.
Now that you have learned what you have learned, it would be well for you to return to your own country.
I definitely hear what you're saying. I really love Philip Glass, and I love the soundtrack for the movie. But I could also see the annoyance with it, like that there's wall-to-wall music. I mean, like it's well done, but there's no breath in it. It's all just blasting you in the face.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so the score in the '79 version.
John Williams. That surprised me when I saw that. I was really excited that we were going to get a John Williams score. I had no idea that he had taken part in this film. That's great. It sounded amazing too. I thought it was interesting in this that they turned Mina into a Van Helsing in this story, which is totally different from some of the others.
Yeah, they switched the names, I think, instead of Mina with the friend named Lucy. And
Right.
I had heard that I think Badham felt that Mina is kind of a silly-sounding name, so almost comical name, so he switched it to Lucy,
I thought that was an interesting move that, Van Helsing would come back back to England to find out that his daughter had died under some strange circumstances, some strange puncture wounds, and all of a sudden a loss of blood, whatever that was, or whatever that could be. But then all of a sudden Van Helsing
see what happens.
Yeah, Van Helsing becomes Van Helsing, like right when he gets to town, and he's doing the investigation, and he's got another one of those where he's got the tools and all that, and he's a great vampire hunter, and he becomes that, like, almost a scientist in this one.
Speaking of Van Helsing's arrival in the 1979 version, like the first time we really meet him, he's in the cemetery, and Dracula rolls up on the horse, and it's still daylight out. Was that just they were shooting day for night, and
he could be out during the day, they said.
But then the ending, he sees the sun and gets roasted, right?
Yeah, this film is not going to take a lot of points for logical consistency, certainly. But one of the vampires, Van Helsing, sees his daughter's reflection in a pool of water, and they're not supposed to cast reflections. But it's a good creepy moment. So one of the things this film took, one of the things this film took a lot of brickbats for when it came out was Laurence Olivier playing Van Helsing. Because that was near the end of his career. He was basically taking any movie he could get to have money to leave to his kids, and so a lot of people kind of slag it off as being another Laurence Olivier movie, and it's kind of embarrassing because he's so old. But I have to say, I think he's really fantastic. Good, Now, given the age difference between him and his daughter, he was a randy old man apparently. But the scenes with him and Donald Pleasance, I think, are really well played.
Oh yeah.
What in God's name could have happened?
I don't know.
Jack, you must explain to me.
I am
from the beginning, as patiently as you can.
Well, it's interesting because I was looking at the cast in this when we were talking about this film or doing this film, and I saw Donald Pleasance on the list. I'm like, oh, he's Van Helsing for sure. But no, he's not. He's Seward, or Dr. Seward, and he's kind of a goofy...
No, it's like, look, this is filmed like weeks after Halloween was released, and of course,
who's
the
Loomis?
guy in charge of the nut house?
Dr. Loomis.
Donald Pleasance. Yeah, of course.
I forgot about that. That's a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think all the performances in this are very good. It's the first thing I think I'd seen Kate Nelligan in, and I thought she was quite good as Lucy.
Yeah.
And you get a Doctor Who in it, although he doesn't have any speaking lines.
Which Doctor Who's in this?
One of the assistants there in the asylum, Sylvester McCoy.
God, he was Walter Myrtle, according to the cast list there.
Yeah, and he was Doctor Who for a year or two in the 70s, I think.
Is that a preview of the next book, Bruce? Doctor Who Companion?
No, I enjoyed some of the Doctor Who's, but I haven't watched it for years.
In the 79 version, kind of cranking up the violence and the horror, either Mina or Lucy, I think it was Mina, snuck into the nut house and ate a baby.
Yes, and they showed
what the hell?
Yeah, that was a pretty rough one.
That's in the novel, that she's luring children to their deaths in the graveyard, and they're calling her the Bloofer Lady.
But even like infants?
Maybe not infants in the novel, but in the novel, Dracula goes out and brings back a baby to throw to his brides to eat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, or to drain of blood, at least.
They do that in the Coppola movie. Yeah, he hands them their treat.
It seems like it would be an inefficient snack there. I mean, it seems like it'd be a lot more blood in a...
Well, it's better than what Renfield gets. He gets bugs, right? He just gets whatever he can find.
Bug. Oh, you didn't think I had a bug, did you?
Yeah, and he sneaks it in. That was a good one.
You've got no blood in you anyway.
And besides, I've got one here that you didn't find before.
Right, in the straitjacket with him. Get him.
There is a scene in the 31 Dracula, Renfield kind of creeping across the floor towards the nurse who's fainted.
Yes.
And they cut away. Right? Well, if they let the shot play out before it was cut, and I don't know why they cut it necessarily, but he creeps up on her, and there's, I guess, a fly on her, and he like snatches the fly and eats it.
Oh, that's
But
they should have left that going.
They should have let it go. We just see him crawling up, and they cut away, and you have no idea what horrible things he's doing to that poor woman. You know?
I think that's the reason to cut away, because your mind fills in the gaps there with something even more horrible than what happened and what was filmed.
But in this one, they didn't shy away from the visual. They showed you everything. I mean, Renfield getting his head turned around 180 degrees in the asylum was pretty nuts too. And then he hits the ground and like coughs out the blood. I don't know if you saw that when he hits the ground and his head's backwards, and then that blood just shoots out of his mouth. That was pretty graphic.
Yeah, there's some pretty good shock moments in it. Now, the other thing I remember about seeing it in 1979. Was as I was walking out with my buddy there was a couple of women, maybe late 20s, 30s, who had been there to watch the movie, and one of them sees a friend of hers in the lobby who's seeing something else. Like, what are you seeing? Oh, I just saw Dracula. He's so dreamy. Or something to that effect. It may not be the exact words used, but it was something to that effect. So certainly that was the draw for that Dracula was to, I think they had an ad line on their poster too that's, for centuries he's filled the hearts of men with terror and the hearts of women with desire. So they were definitely playing up the romantic aspect of it. And certainly with Langella.
Very good look at Dracula, yeah. And I just love that he doesn't even eat at the dinner that they're at. You're talking about this man, this count
He's like,
from
send it
another
away,
country.
I'm finished. Yeah.
He doesn't eat anything. He just doesn't eat his soup, doesn't drink his wine, and he also does the never drink wine line. He also doesn't want, like you said, don't taint the blood with the drugs because
it'll pollute her blood.
Right?
It'll pollute her blood. Yeah. He almost throws away no, I never drink wine. He almost throws it away, but it kind of resonates because we've all seen the other versions.
Exactly, yeah, because that line, yeah.
And he's got the Lugosi hands. I mean, the first time we really see him, it's that hand coming out from that fur coat, fur coat.
Right.
Well, that was kind of his transformation from a wolf, right? Because
it's a wolf-like
very subtle
form.
Yeah, right.
But it's funny because his coat has a lot of wolf-like fur on it.
Right.
But it totally is staged as if he's turning back into a human form, or like he has human fingers sprouting out of a wolf's paw.
Yeah, I thought that was an effective shot. I really liked that because I was very confused what was happening in a great way. And then when there's the reveal, but I do want to talk about the Demeter beginning because this is kind of like all of the things that we didn't see in the 31, but we get to kind of get a rewind here of what actually happened, and it's pretty nasty. The captain gets it pretty bad, and he's dead in the same exact way. He's up on the steerage of the steering wheel of the ship, but this one he's got his entire throat ripped out, and they don't shy away from the violence.
Right after the opening theme song there, it's like within the first 2 minutes you're seeing the graphic throat ripping scene.
It's awesome.
So it certainly sets you up for what you're going to be getting as far as the gore goes. But there was a lot of just really neat effects in this. I loved the little kind of split screen thing to do where Dracula leaps out the window and the wolf comes out the other side.
Comes out.
That was great.
That was very well done.
I was going to bring that up.
I thought the bats were cool, especially the animatronic when they did the close up of the bat, and you could really see that it was just this gnarly, almost a flying rat kind of thing. Like it wasn't a bat, right? Like it was something else, but that was really neat too.
Or when they're in the catacombs there and Harker hits Dracula with the shovel and he instantly turns into the bat. That was a good effect. So
very cool. Yeah.
Even the crawling, the sort of 66 Batman crawling down the side of the castle there, was done to such great effect.
Yeah.
I mean, he did it several times, and then he goes to peel the sort of grout out of the glass with his hand, and why is his hand this way? And then you see the camera kind of moves over to the left, and we see his head is upside down. And there are all these great little moments like that played so well. Although I have to say, the first time we see him crawling down the face of the castle or building or whatever it is. Then we cut to like the actual 66 Batman shot, like in profile. And as he's going down, he kind of like turns his head toward the camera, and it looks like he looks in the lens, and it's like as if to say, "Yeah, I'm doing this shot, asshole. What are you gonna do about it?"
Yeah, that's.
What do you think?
Yeah. That shot's always kind of bugged me a little bit because of that it kind of breaks the moment a bit, because it's like he's looking directly at you in the audience.
It did. It wasn't just me that thought that, right? Huh?
No, I mean, I could have done without that turn of the head.
I can reward you with a long and fruitful life, but I must have your loyalty. Can you give that?
I think the ending with they had trouble as they were shooting coming up with a good ending for it, which, you'd think the story's been around for so long. I don't know why they had such a hard time, but maybe they just wanted to do something different and didn't want to fall on the old tropes. And I will say, I do think W.D. Richter's script is very good. He had done the remake prior to this of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, yeah.
Which I also enjoyed
Great
a
film,
lot
yeah.
with Donald Sutherland.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, just all the way around, I think this is the 79 Dracula is a very well-produced film. And if you didn't see Langella on Broadway, it's as close as you'll ever get to seeing what his Dracula performance might have been like. I know one person who did see it on Broadway and said it was just terrific. So
I have buried many friends, and I too am weary. I am the last of my kind, descended from a conquering race.
One sort of last thing to kind of wrap up on with the 79 version for me. I mean, I did really enjoy sort of the different ending, like you're saying. I mean,
it was pretty epic, that fight.
It was great that they sort of were doing the chase, and then they get down to the dock and they have to kind of get onto the boat. And there's this whole thing, and then even the second to last shot of, is it Lucy?
Lucy.
Yeah. Because all the characters in this one are the exact same, but they've all just been like dropped into a Yahtzee cup and sprinkled out every single one of these movies. So
exactly.
It's a little confusing watching them back to back. But so Lucy, like looking at the fluttering bat kite, or perhaps just the roasted rags of Dracula flying away, and her sort of lusty look after it, or she looked very hungry.
The enigmatic smile, kind
of.
Right.
I mean, I think it's meant to be an ambiguous ending. Is she going to go rejoin Dracula at some point? Is she?
Or is she the next over?
Is she the next
Dracula?
main vampire here?
She's still under his spell. Still in love.
Is she going to continue his work and continue to make more of our kind, as he said?
Is she pregnant with a little Dracula? Although you wonder if a dead person can make someone pregnant. But and again, you get that John Williams score at the end that kind of saves the day. But and also, when this came out, I think because it had been so popular on Broadway and there had been the imitators on Broadway, then you began to get more cinematic Draculas, like Dracula Love at First Bite.
Oh, yeah. Wait, was that the...
George Hamilton.
George Hamilton, yeah. The tan. I was going to say the guy with
the tan guy.
Tan. Yeah, the tan guy.
Yeah, the sort of oxymoron kind of thing. Let's get the most tan guy in the world to play a guy who hasn't seen sunlight in 500 years. But I enjoyed the film. I will say, if you're able to find a DVD of it, and they're kind of scarce, I picked up one when I was writing the book, and the thing that immediately stood out to me is in the big disco scene in it. When you saw it,
you think John Badham would be the one with the disco scene in it, right?
You would, but when you saw Love at First Bite in the theater, Dracula dances with Susan St. James to I Love the Nightlife. Apparently, they didn't lock down those music rights for any other versions, because in this DVD version I have, I can't remember what it is, but it's a different song from that era, disco song, planted in there, but not I Love the Nightlife. And it kind of suffers because of that. If you saw the original, that song and that scene just went so well together that it's hard to imagine anything else. And even though, George Hamilton's definitely doing a Lugosi impersonation through it, but he does it very well.
I was going to ask for, I guess, one more thing I wanted to bring up was, I don't know if either of you had seen the BBC short series that they did of Dracula. It came out a few years ago. It was like it was just a 3-part.
Is this the one that was on Netflix?
It might have been on Netflix, yes.
With
exactly.
The actor from Game of Thrones, yeah. Well, first off, in the 70s also, right before the Langella Dracula, there was a BBC Dracula with Louis Jourdan that was a little more faithful to the novel. Louis Jourdan was a pretty good Dracula. I think it showed him scaling the building, which you didn't see much back in those days. And they did shoot some of the Lucy and Mina scenes in Whitby, which is a great place to go. So, I'm going to be on their tourist board now. But yeah.
It's brought to you by Whitby.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Whitby. Visit tomorrow. Yeah. And Chiltern Guest House. But yeah, that one, they did do some shooting there in Whitby, which kind of makes it stand out to me. And although they did have these weird 70s video effects in it from time to time, solarized kind of effects, which kind of detract from it. But I went off on a tangent. Oh, the BBC, the more recent one that was on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was because it was being done by the guys who produced Sherlock and Doctor Who, I was really looking forward to it. And really disappointed by it because I felt like...
Really?
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting take, especially because they kind of played a tribute to all of the films, including the Coppola film.
At the beginning,
with,
very
different
Coppola-esque.
costuming.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
But that particular actor's way of playing Dracula just didn't resonate with me.
Got it,
And the storyline in general of the sort of female Van Helsing...
Which it's like the rock opera. It makes or breaks the film on the music, and this one, if the Dracula, you don't like the person playing Dracula, it's probably going to make or break the series or the movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean the Coppola Dracula. Again, I love Gary Oldman as an actor. His Dracula, it didn't quite work for me, and part of it for me is that he does such a thick Romanian accent that if you didn't know what the lines were from the previous movies, you'd have a hard time knowing what he's saying.
Exactly.
Listen to them, the children of the night. What? Oh, children of the night. Right.
What sweet music they make.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's only been around for 500 years. English is not his first language.
Yeah, and he's probably worn his voice out a bit by now after 500 years. So,
Pick up a book, Drac.
But I have already died. And I never drink wine.
Bruce, thank you so much again for joining us. Can you plug what you have going on?
I'm publishing books now as Henry Gray Publishing. So you can go to henrygraypublishing.com and see what those are. And all those books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so on, or you can order them through the website.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bruce.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I had a great time. I mean, it's fun to talk about Dracula with people who really like Dracula films.
It was a pleasure having you.
And I thought these were great versions of them. They were great examples of the vampire film, the Dracula films. They were awesome.
For my money, 3 of the best,
Yeah.
Your will is strong, Van Helsing.
All right, next time on the show, we'll be continuing with our afterlife discussion. Not so much the undead side of things, but more of the comedic, I think, lighthearted side of things. Is that right, Jeremy?
Yeah, a less directly horrifying version of the afterlife. Something that happens after you die, but, there are still some stakes somehow.
And our afterlife films that we'll be discussing are A Matter of Life and Death from 1945, Defending Your Life from 1991, and Afterlife from 1998. I have never heard of Afterlife.
Yeah, it's a Japanese film.
Excellent.
That kind of has the same subject matter. So all of them are, the protagonist dies in the beginning and then is in some sort of waiting room there having to defend their lives. Some of them are more comedic than others, I think, and it'll be kind of an interesting array of this interesting little subgenre there.
And we'll be joined by a guest on that one again, I believe. Is that correct?
We will, hopefully.
Hopefully,
We
good.
will.
We'll figure out timing, but if not, it'll just be us.
Yeah. So we should have a guest, and then who these films hold a special place in his heart, and he'll be able to take us through why they're so important.
Aren't you drinking?
I never drink. Why?
All right, thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute, including YouTube. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next time.
Ciao.
You will be flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. You shall cross land or sea to do my bidding.